Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Ramona Giwargis, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of San Jose Spotlight, the city's nonprofit independent newsroom. And I'm also a board member of the Society of Professional Journalists NorCal chapter. It truly is a pleasure to moderate this forum tonight on a topic that is so personally important to me. I know firsthand the stigma that comes with facing mental health challenges. It's even harder when you work in an industry like journalism. Like a first responder, you are exposed to trauma again and again. You cover historic, tragic, and unprecedented events like a global pandemic, civil unrest, and for us here at home, a mass shooting that happened just a few months ago. And in our industry, we're told to be tough. Keep going, don't show emotions, just be grateful you have a job. At San Jose Spotlight, we have learned a lot about how to care for our journalists. We have an editor who makes mental health a focal point of his conversations with reporters. He checks in with them every day, asking how they're doing. And we offer paid monthly mental health days. But there's still so much work to do. That's why this conversation today is so important. And before I introduce our panelists and we get started, if you have any questions for our panel, please drop them in the Q&A box below. We'll be picking some questions out, and at the end of the forum tonight, we'll answer as many questions as we can. So thank you so much to the panelists for being here today, and thank you to SPJ NorCal for hosting and Create TV for having us here in studio in downtown San Jose. I'm so excited to introduce the three panelists sitting beside me. First, Moryt Milo is an award-winning journalist and mental health advocate. She serves on the board of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, known as NAMI, in Santa Clara County. She's a veteran newspaper editor and reporter, and she refocused her career after her son was diagnosed with a severe mental illness. She'll talk a little bit about that later today. Today, in addition to her editorial work, she writes and speaks to promote mental health literacy and to eliminate mental health discrimination. And sitting beside me here, David K. Mineta. He's the president and CEO of Momentum for Mental Health. He was appointed to the position in August of 2015. And from 2010 to 2015, Mr. Mineta served as the presidential appointee in the position of Deputy Director of Demand Reduction for the White House Drug Policy Office. In 1996, he worked with Asian American Recovery Services and was named Deputy Director in 2007. He served twice as board president for the Jefferson Union High School District Board of Trustees. Mr. Mineta received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Master of Social Work from San Jose State University, my alma mater, yay. And then we also have here today, Sara Gaiser. Sara has worked as a reporter and editor in the Bay Area for 20 years. When the pandemic struck, Sara was the managing editor of the San Francisco Examiner, which we'll talk a little bit about her role and how she navigated through that. And she is now the PM local news editor at KQED. So thank you so much, Sara, Moryt, and David for joining us today. I want to jump right in, and I want to start with you, Sara. As we just mentioned, you led the award-winning publication, the San Francisco Examiner, through a very tumultuous 2020. Again, from civil unrest to the unprecedented pandemic, you were in the middle of it all. And now you're a news editor at KQED. The past year and a half was relentless when it came to covering traumatic news and events. What were the challenges your team faced covering these historic stories?
I think that the important point to start with is that we were already stressed and already struggling even before the pandemic began. We were it was a small publication, and we had already had some budget cuts and lost some positions in November. We had lost someone else due to some financial issues in January. So we were already stressed. And the reason I think it's important to mention that is because I think that's common in this industry. I think a lot of outlets, we're already seeing layoffs and cuts and various forms of stress on their people even before this kicked in. And then, of course, we had to deal with, the sudden pivot to working from home, and there were further financial shocks. We were all on furlough at one point. We lost more people. We were eventually bought. I won't get into all that, but the point is, it was a very chaotic year on that front. And in the midst of it, we had this, relentless, flood of COVID stories that we were struggling to stay on top of. And that consumed every other beat. It made it so that we couldn't cover. I mean, there was a corruption scandal in San Francisco, and we were not in a position where we could do as much with that as we wanted to, because we were so, consumed with just trying to keep on top of the breaking stuff with COVID. So it was a challenge all around for us just to keep up with it.
How did you support your team through it?
I mostly just try to be as honest and transparent with them as possible, and try to cut them some slack. And it wasn't always easy. I was feeling a lot of pressure too to try and keep things going. I was as anxious as anyone was about, how things were gonna go. But I just try to be clear with them about, okay, we need this because of this, and also have those conversations around, we can't do that. It's just not possible, and to learn to let some things go.
Right. That's really important. Learn to let some things go, because I think as editors, we want to cover it all, and we realize we just can't, not in this moment. Yeah. David, your organization, Momentum for Health, which is based right here in San Jose, provides comprehensive mental health services to adolescents and adults. Are you seeing a rise in requests for help, including from folks dealing with substance use disorders, in connection with the pandemic?
Yes. We are seeing that rise, and I think it's important, Ramona, thanks, because I want to just make sure that we're framing it for us. We want to make sure we're talking about both mental health as well as the substance use disorder side. So for us, it's sort of under that larger umbrella of behavioral health issues. We're seeing increases on both sides of it, and both in the public sector referrals as well as the commercial insurance sector. So all of us who are covered under our employment, we're seeing increase in the number of referrals for those folks as well. So this is pretty broad spectrum, we think, across society, showing the effects of the stressors and all of the pandemic.
And what are some of those stressors of the pandemic? What are some of the stressors that the pandemic has sparked when it comes to the workplace? And specifically, how has working from home contributed to reports of rising anxiety and depression?
Yeah, it's interesting. As Sara said, we had the same experience, that we went from in-person, in-face appointments to almost overnight having to turn into by phone and virtual. And that was no easy task, one, for not just Momentum, but all the behavioral health agencies to this, not just again in South Bay, everywhere this happened. So again, that's a ton of stress making those changes. Seems relatively easy because all of a sudden you're like, well, you aren't meeting in person anymore, right? No, not so easy. The other issue I think that it points out is that when people were working, we were more flexible. We were sending people home. There were their virtual appointments, their calls were coming from home. That was also adding to the stress of that workforce now working from home. Again, who knew that parents were going to have to turn to teachers, caregivers, 24/7 caregivers. So all of those demands adding up on just worker, added stress, anxiety. We were going through, again, as the number of referrals were going up. This last year, we saw 10% more folks than we did the year previous. We provided 60% more services than the prior non-pandemic year. That's an awful lot of extra services. So again, lots of reason for anxiety, stress. What's added now is that over that 19 months, people are burnt out. They're just super tired. So what we're going to talk about tonight, I would just like to say, I feel like we're talking about journalists. I feel like almost every industry is feeling this. So in many ways, we're building this, we're literally building the plane as we're flying right now on how to best support staff, create environments of wellness and support.
right? And even though, I think the majority of our audience either works in journalism or has some connection to the industry, we really wanted everyone who's watching, even if they're not journalists, to take something away from the discussion tonight. So thank you for touching on that. Moryt, as a longtime editor and a member of the NAMI board here locally, is the workplace pressure that journalists face today worse than those several decades ago? Like, how does it compare? How has the industry changed when it comes to stress, for better or for worse?
So, I thought about this question when you first presented it to us, and I think that the industry as a whole has never changed. Journalism is a 24-hour type of business. It never shuts down, it never stops. I think what has changed is the journalism pre-smartphones, pre-internet, pre-social media. Now you have journalism instead of with a 24-hour function of telling the news, 24 seconds can go by, the news can change. So what's really happened is it's only added more pressure to the pressure that's already exists within this particular sector of industry. And I think that it just throw a pandemic on top of it. And as Sara said, I mean, it's so many other factors on top of it, including, companies coming in and buying newspapers, gutting the news staff, leaving more people to do more, leaving less people to do more work. That's just pressure on pressure. And then today's point, you don't stop anymore. Now we're home and it just doesn't end. We're just working all the time. So I think the biggest factors are technology and social media has just changed the pace of rhythm and how everything's accelerated. And that is just a lot of pressure here.
Yeah, and nonstop pressure, 24/7.
Right.
What do you think editors and managers can do to support their teams?
So I don't think it's any different than really what Sara just said. Before, the dynamics don't change that way, right? I mean, I can remember when I was in the newsroom, I'm guilty of, we've got to get that story, we've got to be first, we've got to make sure that we don't miss anything so that we look like we're on top of it. So none of that has changed. None of that has changed, but you have to let go somewhere. And if you're, I just can recall, if I was stressed, the newsroom was stressed. If I could be calm, then that filtered back down to the staff. So all of that is still the same. I think it's just that we have so many other things that keep bombarding us at the same time. And it's tougher to maintain that sense of calmness, when everything around us is kind of more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. David, how do you define a healthy workplace, and is there such a thing anyway?
Absolutely. And I think that a workplace that prioritizes wellness, that prioritizes the well-being of their employees. And we have great examples, throughout, I'd say throughout the area. The pandemic and the conditions that we're working in now, though, I think present a challenge of our entire career lifetime right now, and how to make those environments and climates of wellness, how to make it stick, how to remember and to be aware to keep doing it. Sometimes we get so tired, you just forget. I mean, I think communication is absolutely key in this, in being able to say, hey, this is what we're doing for your wellness, or for, trying to be flexible. Hey, managers, take it easy on your folks right now. This is going on. Honestly, sometimes in the busyness of the day, you're just like, you forget. You're like, hey, I got to get on this. And having those constant reminders, and that is an environmental team issue, right? So somebody falls down because we're stressed out. I get it, again, I love that. When I'm stressed out, dead like everybody else. So those reminders of trying to take a walk, take your time, slow this down when we can. When we turn it over to journalism, what I really appreciate about this discussion is just in talking with the three of you, I get to feel that stress and the competition in all of it, right? And I think,
We wear it
wow,
well.
good luck. Hey, this is a really important discussion right now. This is really important.
You feel the stress through the Zoom call of all the journalists who are
Yes, I
watching.
know, right? Watching that.
On deadline.
Wow. I'm stressed out.
I only have 5 minutes, I gotta go file a story.
I gotta go for a walk.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for acknowledging that, and you know, we hear a lot about the great resignation of 2021, right? People quitting their jobs, looking for healthier alternatives, but you know, not everyone can quit their jobs. Some of us really, you know, that's not an option. So what should employees do to set boundaries when it comes to an unhealthy workplace?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, and I would have to give credit to, we have staff that we're also a union shop, and so we've had in discussion with SEIU, you know, I received a letter, let's see, back in July, and I appreciate this, and I appreciate the discussion we're having with our staff. They're just like, hey, look, you know, the conditions, the productivity levels, all this, I mean, there's just the stress of everything. I think it's to stay in communication. It's to do, I mean, I really do appreciate that letter. I appreciate the discussions we've had before and after. So it's being able to talk to your supervisor and say, hey, look, this is going on. And I'd include everything that's going on in people's personal lives. I mean, absolutely, everything that happens after work, that is now affecting people, obviously, in work, and that is all fair game. And the supervisors, you know, again, what you said earlier, that, you know, your editor at Sensei Spotlight's like, checking with how are you doing, right? That's the first question. How are you doing?
It's amazing how many editors don't ask that question. They just keep going, right? So it's an important moment to stop and see how people are doing. That's important.
Yeah.
Sara, are news leaders doing enough today to prevent burnout?
I mean, obviously, we could all do more. I do want to give a shout out. One of the reasons I was so excited to take a position at KQED recently is because they do have a good reputation for taking care of their people. And I spoke to people who worked there before I took the job, and they, you know, they try to give people some breathing room and some flexibility and things like that. And so I do appreciate that approach a lot. And they have some various support programs and things. So some employers are trying very hard. Overall, as an industry, unfortunately, we tend to push people to just produce as much as possible and to meet the deadlines, and we tend to focus on that most and get to the emotional side later.
Yeah, and I don't know how that changes because it's so built into our industry, right? That idea of productivity. If you're comfortable sharing, Moryt, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your personal experience. You had a mental health crisis that you experienced with your son. Can you tell us a little bit more about his story, and again, to the extent you're comfortable sharing, you know, how is he doing today?
Well, first of all, he's doing really well. So we'll start with the positives, so
Yeah.
we don't have to bury the lead, as we would say, right? And he just graduated from college in May, and to understand where that came from, it all began. He was at college in the state of Washington, and he had a complete mental health crisis in the moment. And for us, it was a midnight phone call from jail that said, I need help. So we didn't know anything that was going on. It was just jump on a plane to San Jose and get to Washington to see what's happening. And that set off a 2-year ordeal in him being hospitalized in Washington and bringing him home to California. And in that process, we had the wonderful discovery of a completely broken mental system in the state of California. Now, ironically, the gentleman sitting next to me, his organization helped my son. And so twice. But in the interim, aside from Momentum's assistance, everything was, he was untreated, he was constantly discharged from the hospital. Ultimately, he ended up on the streets of San Francisco because a residential facility that he was in, when he told them he was getting in his car and going to see the FBI, they just let him leave. And so I lost my son in the city of San Francisco, which actually triggered me having to leave my job. Because when it comes down to your family or your work, there's really no decision there. But what's really important in all of it is that there's a lot of collateral damage that happens around the person who's sick. So I didn't understand at first why I couldn't concentrate. why I would sit there and look at a piece of copy and all of a sudden I couldn't do it. And I was terrified and I did not want to tell anybody because that's my job, that's my livelihood, that's my health insurance. And so you have all of those factors that are floating around, you know, why if I have to write a story, all of a sudden I can't seem to get it finished. And you don't understand because you're so focused on the person you care for, you don't realize that your own health is also in jeopardy. And it took me a long time to realize that, you know, there was trauma happening in my family, with me, with my husband, with my dog. And I don't know how an employer can pick up on that unless they're really savvy, because I hid it. I certainly didn't want my staff to know that I was weak, that I might not be able to handle their needs. Until for me, it ultimately just came to a head. And truthfully, when it happened, everybody couldn't figure out why I walked out. You know, why did she leave? What happened? One person knew because I was very close to that person. So it's a demonstration of how your own personal life can tremendously affect your job. And I don't think it matters whether you're in journalism or anything. It's a level playing field in that regard. But I do think it's particularly hard when you're in a job that runs you 24/7. I can relate to why, you know, people burn out in the profession even without this problem. So throw that on top of it, you know. And I love the industry in spite of everything. So I think that's the important thing to be really cognizant of. If you're a manager and you're overseeing, you know, I can remember there was one reporter I had. She was just the best in the newsroom. And her work started floundering and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I just told her something was wrong. And she said, my mom's really sick. I said, I know what to do. You're gonna put your papers down, you're gonna make a ticket, you're gonna go to Chicago and see your mom. And her response was, what about my copy? And I said, don't worry, we'll find somebody else to take the stories. Don't worry about it, just do it. And that's what happens in our profession, right? You know, the loyalty of that staff is like, oh, I can't let you down. Right. Well, it's okay. It's okay. You know what? You're not letting us down. I'd rather know that what's going on than for you to be in here struggling.
That's so powerful. And how powerful for you to take that moment and sit down with this person and really try to dig into, because a lot of managers might not have done that.
Well, I think, you know, and I bet Sarah's the same way and I know you are, that's family. That's family. And it's really hard not to if you're really working down in the trenches with them, to not recognize that something's off. And that impacts everybody in the news too. So, and what it also does is rally everybody, right? Because you say, look, you know, so-and-so has to take off her mom is sick. Well, okay, fine, no problem. We'll cover this, we'll cover that. You know, then you have a team. You know, no matter how short-handed you are, you're a team. Yeah.
People step up.
And it's just up to us to make sure that we don't miss those signs.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage our viewers to please add questions to the Q&A box if you have them. We're gonna leave some time at the end to get to those questions. Moryt, what do you wish every parent or employer knew about coping with these mental health challenges?
Wow. You know, I think the biggest challenge, well, as a parent, you just don't know. I mean, I tell people I missed the biggest story in the world, which was the mental health crisis. You know, here I am, a news reporter, and I didn't even know this was around until my son became sick. I don't know. I really don't have a good answer for that. I don't know if Dave does either. You know, in terms of if it's not in front of you, if you don't have any sense of mental health literacy around you, if there's nobody in your family who is ill, I just, you know, I think the biggest thing that I know where I faltered was I sensed a few things as my son was growing up in his middle school years. And I didn't know what to do, but intuitively as a mom, I knew something was wrong. But the signs just didn't blow up on me until it was too late. So it's really not just what I can do, but what can the schools do? How can they help a child recognize that, you know, they can come to their parent and say, you know, Mom, I'm a little sad, or Mom, I'm a little anxious. You know, my son would have never said that to me because they didn't know. But if they're taught to understand that, then they'll come to you, I think, more openly. So it's education early on that can change the dynamic.
And starting young, it sounds like that's really
Mhm.
important. Thank you for sharing. I
Of
know it's a
course.
deeply personal
Sure,
story,
no
and I'm so glad and happy to hear that things are well, and thank you again for opening up about it. David, I wanted to talk a little bit about trauma, especially trauma as it relates to the workplace. How do we define trauma? We hear that term thrown around a lot, and it's something I think many journalists face without even knowing it. How do you define it, and what are the solutions?
So trauma, as I think as we define it, is just it's an experience that produces psychological injury or hurt. All right, so it's an experience, big, small, an experience. It's interesting already that we've already talked about a lot of experiences. Right, so already today here we talk about experiences at work, at home. I think Moryt put it wonderfully in the sense that collateral damage as well for the rest of us, right? So again, an experience that produces psychological injury or harm. And so when you take that into the workplace, what is that in the workplace? And then all of the traumas that we bring in from home, we bring into the workplace. That's a lot. And then in a worldwide pandemic, and then now multiply that by whatever factor. This is our workforce. Here we are. So in some ways, I think that going back to what you asked earlier about that, can there be a workplace that that focuses on well-being? And I don't think we have any other choice because of the shortages in staffing and potential employees. We almost don't even have a choice but to focus on the well-being of the staff. And I think in that way, hopefully, there's some way that all of journalism can see that and then newsrooms, different newsrooms can start working on that and bend that curve on what's sort of expected. Because the grace that both of you have shown folks, that shouldn't be the exception, right? That should be the norm. It's the grace that of being like, you should get on a plane and go see your mom. Asking about how people are doing what KQED does to support its staff, right? That really has to be the norm now, I think, moving out, because what we feel is happening now is the second pandemic is already underway, and that's the behavioral health pandemic. The numbers, actually, we see it supports that, conclusion now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I want to jump back to Sara. I skipped over a question I wanted to ask you earlier. We talked a little about working from home. And I think for some people that's been a great arrangement. They enjoy the flexibility, but for others that can add even more stress to an already stressful job because you feel confined. Do you work from home? And if not, when you were working from home, how have you coped with that? Do you have any kind of tips for the viewers or any kind of ideas that work for you?
I did work at home at the Examiner. Since I started at KQED, I have been going into the office, and I have to say I've been enjoying it a lot. It was difficult to be home. My son was attending 5th grade via Zoom, and my husband was teaching classes, and we were all in a little 2-bedroom apartment within the same general room because the Wi-Fi didn't extend very far. And we would have to stop and help my son with the computer. So it was very stressful to be home a lot of the time. That just everybody was cooped up with each other. So I'm happy to be out of the house, which is not to say that, it wasn't nice to, it was nice to not have to commute and things like that. But so it was stressful, You asked about strategies for coping. I mean, I have a hard time answering that because the truth is I didn't cope very well in some ways personally. My work life expanded to take up all my time at home. Like one of the disadvantages to working from home is that you pretty much roll out of bed and start checking your messages, and you're still sitting there doing things at 8 or 9 at night. And it was especially easy for me to fall into that because we were short-staffed in so many areas. I ended up doing the social media, the newsletter, the this, the that. There was always something that I could be doing, no matter what the hour. And without that clear boundary, I just ended up doing it all. So unfortunately, my strategy is more of a don't do what I did, but yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. My husband and our co-founder Josh Bruce and I, we often talk about this because sometimes like I'll notice it, hours have gone by and I'm still in my pajamas, right? Or like, oh my God, I haven't even gotten changed. So just getting outside, even to take a walk, and getting some fresh air, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, that could really help sort of just get you out of that, I think, that spot where you feel stuck. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's hard for a lot of people. Moryt, I want to jump back to you. As a NAMI board member, I'm sure you deal with this a lot, stigma, right? And I wanted to ask you if you feel like there is still stigma in 2021 when it comes to mental health. Are people afraid to speak up because they perceive that they might be, viewed as being weak? They fear that they might be perceived as being weak, especially in an industry like journalism where you're always told to be tough.
So it's an interesting question because on Tuesday night, I had a panel, the NAMI had a meeting and I was interviewing Tom Ensel, who is the former National Institute of Mental Health Director. And I asked this question to him about stigma. And I will have to say that I think what's happened with stigma has become a very catch-all phrase. It can almost mean anything at this point. I think in mental health, the proper word is discrimination. And I think they agree with me. And I say that because just like somebody with any other kind of illness, why should mental health be any different than physical health? So it's really a discriminatory behavior to have to feel that you have to hide the shadows, that people are making you feel that way. I think that COVID did something very positive in that it's brought out in the transparency of the mental health situation, but not at a high enough level. So people are comfortable talking about depression, they're comfortable talking about anxiety, and more so about suicide. It's difficult conversation as that is. But if you want to talk any further, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anything that's a severe mental illness, those people will not come out the way others will. Not everybody, I'm saying, but the majority will hide behind a curtain because it is not understood. And I'll be very honest, I think the media distorts it. And I didn't even understand it until, like I said, it affected me, and I'm very cognizant of it now whenever I see loaded words or things that are miscommunicated in those areas. You still have a lot of it in movies and in reading, So I think if you're working in any field, especially in journalism, and you have a severe mental illness, but you have the medication and the treatment that you're able to do your job, that person is not receiving. Because if they go to you and say, I have schizophrenia, you might be fearful of them. You might not understand. You might think they're a violent person, which is absolutely incorrect. If somebody says they're bipolar, you might think, oh my God, who knows what they're going to do? They're going to do this one day and do this the other day. Behavior completely unpredictable. Whereas if somebody says to you, I'm suffering some depression, you might understand that, or I'm really anxious. You get that. So those people, yes, they have a chance at least breaking some of the barrier, but we have a long ways to go in getting those other people to be on equal footing with everything. And that's one thing that NAMI tries to do. They have a lot of very important programs that can be a template that actually could even work in an office. I mean, they have a lot of people with their own life experiences, so they're teaching other people about it, and the more we can relate to the overall population, the sooner these kind of discriminatory actions will happen. I just don't think stigma is the right word anymore. And weakness, yes, people do interpret that as weakness, and it will take time. I think Dave can speak to that a little bit too, right, Dave?
Yeah, Moryt had a great interview with Dr. Ensel the other night, and one of the things that he said that, again, that making the distinction on discrimination is that folks with a mental health diagnosis, severe mental illness, the lifespan expectancy is 20 years less.
Wow.
20 years less. You know, and it's like,
Because of the physical that happens along with the
right,
mental.
I mean, it's many different, right, health conditions that then, but it's like, who allows that to, it's like, how do you allow that to happen? 20 years less. And when we have treatments, we have, you know, help that can actually stretch out that, you know, that lifespan. And again, this idea that discrimination allows that and continues that, that's something we have to get at. And when people tell their stories, and this is one thing that's encouraging to me about young folks right now, is that young folks are like, look, I've got this, and it's like, it just is. You know, I heard Assemblyman Alex Lee on a call we had on mental health in the API community, and he talked, and he talks openly about struggles he's had with his own mental health. And I think, like, and he's the youngest, you know, person in the assembly, and I think, like, there's a connection there.
It's only
right?
26 years old.
Yeah,
right?
and it's like, a lot of young folks are moving past that, you know, discrimination, saying, this, you know, I can talk about this freely. And it, by doing so, it helps all of us.
As did Susan Ellenberg at your event.
Very
Center
courageous.
County Supervisor.
Very
Yeah,
courageous
that's
folks,
amazing.
right? And, you know, so I appreciate when athletes do it, celebrities, and any of us normal
Yes,
folks, right? Any of us.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you so much for sharing. And this will be our last question for the panel. And then, of course, we're going to take some questions from the viewers on Zoom. I wanted to pose this question to each of you, and maybe you can give me a couple of ideas and answers on this. Can you share some best practices, ideas, tips, strategies for how you have prioritized your own mental health, avoided burnout, and promoted your overall well-being at work? And anyone who wants to start first, please go ahead. I really like to Sarah.
Since you already admitted you're not doing wrong. I was gonna say, I feel a little awkward because I'm not, the answer is I don't know if I really always have. I did try to do yoga, and I tried to talk to friends and things like that. I did make some efforts. I will say going into the office again and seeing people for me has been wonderful. That social contact is big, and obviously that's not the same for everyone, but for me, that's important to my overall mental health, and having plans and things to look forward to. Yeah, beyond that, figuring out who you can delegate to is so hard, but really important.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Or you're David?
You want me to go?
sure, oh, yeah.
Okay, we'll leave you, you can go last. So what I really had to do, and I'm pretty impressed with myself for being able to continue to do this, to be honest with you. Every time I wake up, because life felt so negative, that I had to find a way to reverse that thinking in my brain. And so short of going to a therapist, what I decided that I really needed to do was every single morning, before I looked at my phone, which was always my habit, was I had to meditate for 15 minutes. I just had to do that. I couldn't look at a thing. And it's been over almost 2 years now, and I've kept at it.
You still meditate.
That's
And I
great.
still do
Yeah,
that.
me too.
And it just to do that quietly, and all I do is think about everything has to be positive, that it's gonna be a good day. Of course, it's not always gonna be a good day, but I mean, at least I wanna set it up that way. I wanna frame my thinking that way.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I have to do is I have to exercise, I have to at least walk. Physically, because I feel like, I'm stuck in a chair, otherwise editing, but otherwise, it's so important just to move and get outside hear a bird and, see the sun and all those things. So those are my two big
Which is so
tips,
hard
yeah.
to do because when you're in a slump, you don't want to move. All you want to do is sit, right?
Right. And get out of your pajamas
Hey,
too.
there you go. That's a note to me. Thank you, Marie. David, what do you think?
I think so much of this is like getting a little exercise, like eating properly, getting some sleep, getting the right amount of sleep. If I could do those two things, wow, I think, or when I do, it really does make a difference. The other one, we've tried to do some things at work where we have a mindfulness breathing contract practice. So we do, right now we're doing 9 a.m., 12, and 3 p.m. where for 15 minutes, these, and we do much longer sessions around this mindfulness and breathing. People can take breaks and do that. So those reminders, trying to get out, again, on walks. But for me, it's more fits and starts. I mean, I do think in some ways, Sarah, I'm probably more of an example of what not to do, but I am giving it the,
But you
a college
recognize
try.
it, but you recognize it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and family and everybody reminds me, and that's the other thing, I think having those supports around you to remind you and say, hey, you should maybe not have the whole sandwich
Yeah.
and maybe you should go for a walk. Yeah, those are good reminders.
Absolutely. These were great tips. Thank you very much for sharing. And I noticed a couple of questions coming up on the screen. One of them was, what do each of the panelists do daily to support their mental health? I think we kind of answered that. You gave some good practices. What's being done in each of your newsrooms or places of business to help support the mental health of reporters and staff? And I think Sarah, you touched on a couple things KQED is doing. Is there anything more you want to kind of?
KQED has a number of different programs and availability of some counseling stuff, and I haven't personally explored all of it yet. I should be clear. I know it's all there, but I haven't yet waited to, test it all. But I know they have those things available, and more than that, they just generally make a point of trying to make it clear to people that there's some flexibility. In the first week that I was there, a top editor sent out an email basically saying, we're short-staffed right now, and at most places I've worked, and that would continue with, and so everybody needs to work much harder now. But it continued instead with, so I just want everyone to understand that, we may need to pull back a little bit, and we don't expect you to do more, and you're doing good work, and it was a very supportive. I don't know if I should be told this, but the point is that that there is a general tone and an expectation that managers are going to be taking that attitude, which I think is important.
That's really good. I don't know, David or Marie, if there's anything you want to add about workplace practices that you do or that you've done in the past to help support mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're at least talking about with staff now is for folks to kind of take their time off as we go. Is normally folks like to bank some of that, and I get it, I understand. In what we're in right now, I'm thinking, no, we got to take it as we go, and either get out on Friday, Monday, or long weekends, we run 24/7 programs, so we have residential programs as well, and those are again 24/7, 365. They are tough to staff, and but again, it's like trying to do something that's specific for the residential programs that are like, okay, that will add to that flexibility and try to reduce stress. Tough to do in those residentials.
Right.
But
those are long shifts.
Yeah, those are long shifts, and
Yeah.
it probably reminds me of a newsroom, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I touched on this a little bit in the introduction, but at San Jose Spotlight, we have an editor named Nick Preciato who does a really good job of just asking folks like, how are you? What do you need? We did an entire meeting around burnout where all we talked about was burnout for the entire meeting. And we talked about, maybe we reduce a story on a certain day of the week, or we shorten the stories so they're not quite so long. And we've done little strategies and things like that. And then we offer everybody a paid day off a month, a mental health day, where they can just turn off their Twitter notifications, their Slack notifications, and just basically, you know, be with their families, be with themselves, recharge their batteries, and then come back to work and do their best work, right, once they're recharged. I think that's really important. So thank you for the question. We have some other really good ones here. This person wants to know, how can we make the lessons around mental health learned in the pandemic, for example, thinking of workers as human beings first, essentially, stick around and embed it in our culture going forward? Will journalism have a tougher time adapting to this? And I think this is open to any of the panelists who want to jump in and tackle that.
Well, I would like to jump into that because I think that, for one, I don't think the pandemic is fully ever going to go away. I think it's just going to iterate into different fashion. You know, what's happened reminds me very much of how the world changed after 9/11. So I think from this point forward, I think we have to understand that people are vulnerable, and we have to be able to be sympathetic to that. And when you're working with a reporter, you know they've just finished a tough story. I think it's important to tell you did a great job. And I think every employer needs to be more active in being transparent from the get-go, that they're in their hiring, they talk about that they have assistance programs. That if they're transparent, if this is a real top-down situation, right? So if the employer says, look, I have these problems, I don't think that's weakness, I think that's strength. And then the people around them might be less likely to feel intimidated or hiding, you know. At least they know it's an accepting conversation. And that's where I think we start. And that's what I think the pandemic has done, is open the doors to enable us to do. And it's going to be up to companies, large and small, to take advantage of this really unique opportunity that we have in front of us. And you're right, Sarah. I mean, in the newsroom, it's always like, oh, get it filed, get it done, you know. But how important is that now? You know, so one story doesn't get up, nobody's going to notice but the newsroom, right?
Right.
So
Right.
and so as the people managing that news, they have to say, okay, we missed that one. So,
Or we
another
weren't
one,
first.
you know?
It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, we
It's
have this
okay.
culture in journalism, we
Yeah.
have to be first, but the readers really don't care, I think.
I
You
don't
know,
think
whether
they
we're
care.
10 minutes late or 2 hours late, you know.
So you
they're-
didn't beat out Twitter, you didn't beat out Instagram, you didn't beat out TikTok, so what?
Right,
You know,
right, absolutely.
they already got it, they're done with it, they've moved on, and that's the other thing. People are moving so fast today, so what they've read, they've forgotten, and the next thing is on up there. And those type of recognizing that is, I think, what can answer that individual's question.
Absolutely.
I would also hope,
Yeah.
I would also hope that the push toward working at home, I mean, for all that it was frustrating for me at some points, it was also nice to have that option and that flexibility, and I think that's true for a lot of people. We have to deal with so many things already, but it's honestly, it just doesn't matter whether someone is in the office or at home as long as they're doing the work. And I think as an industry, we've maybe been reluctant to embrace that kind of approach, but this has forced a lot of places to recognize that it can make it work. And I think that will be a good thing overall for people.
Yeah, that works well for some people.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's interesting to me right now, in some ways, I kind of feel like the fact that we're even having this conversation right now is, to this question, it shows to me progress of recognizing the situation we're in. So, I mean, I appreciate that, you know, SPJ, Sanzai Spotlight, Creativity, you know, all feeling this topic was important and that we're even discussing it right now. I mean, so the needle is moving. The question, I mean, the priority now is to make sure we keep moving the needle and it becomes permanent, right? So this sort of humanity, we're focusing on our staff and really their families and whole person. And when we do, it'll come back in results to actually what we're doing. So I think that's the endeavor now.
Thank you, David. That's very true. It's progress to even be sitting here talking about this. That's an amazing point. This question deals with freelancers, and I think it's a really important one. Do news organizations have a legal liability to ensure the mental health of their staff? And what about freelancers? Do they have do they have a liability to ensure the mental health of their staff, including freelancers?
That's an interesting question. I mean, as far as staff goes, I'm not sure if I would frame it as legal liability per se, but it's definitely in the employer's interest to keep their staff happy and healthy and productive. You're just gonna have better results if you do. That would be an interesting to delve into the legalities of it. But just on a basic self-interest level, we absolutely should. As far as freelancers go, it really depends on how you work with freelancers. Some of them are just pitching in the occasional assignment and it's not that close of a working relationship. Others you're dealing with much more closely and frequently and probably should be given more of that care and attention. But on the whole, yeah, freelancers are in a tough spot. They don't have that same support network and they are gonna have to find other places to get it to some extent, realistically.
Makes sense.
You know, I always look at the freelancer as a potential hire. So I always thought that if somebody was working for me as a freelancer and they were really putting in a lot of time and they were as dedicated as my staff, knowing the turnover in the news industry, I thought, well, maybe that's my next hire. And it happened many, many times. So I mean, you can't give them what you give a staff member because it's a different thing. It's a gig kind of economy for them. But at the same time, I always felt that, well, if they see that we have a good working relationship and they get to know how my newsroom works, then if I'm in a position where I have an opening, maybe they'll come on board. So I always thought that way and treated them, you know, as if they were staff, but not really in that staff column.
Yeah.
So to speak.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So this question already answered. It was about what's being done in our places of employment. This question is about how can editors and managers effectively recreate a healthy newsroom environment with a distributed workforce? How do we facilitate and nurture that remotely? So with a distributed workforce, how do we recreate a healthy newsroom environment? That's a good question.
It's really hard. I would say, I mean, and that's been striking me as I've been back in the office a little lately. It's been striking how much more, how much easier it is to interact with people and to discuss things and make decisions and collaborate. So, but you have to step up the number of meetings to a certain extent, which is unfortunate. You have to do a lot more messaging, slacking, phone calls, Zooms, all of that. And it can be hard. I did try to encourage reporters to talk to each other as well as me, because one of the things that happens is that the rest of this, they're all talking to me, but they're not really talking to each other. They get a little disconnected. And I thought that was kind of important, was to maintain some of those connections.
Absolutely. A lot more communication, that's true. Everything you could just walk over to someone's desk and say, now you're doing it on Slack, now you're doing it on a text message. And we try to get on more in San Jose Spotlight, like we're trying to get on the phone a lot more than we normally would, because I think even just that inflection and knowing what their intentions were goes a long way rather than all day long slacking, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, David.
Well, and I think the reporters want that too. I think they need that, it's just that, like you said, when I'm talking to these folks on Slack all day long, or it's like I say, oh, you know what, I'm gonna call you.
Yeah.
because this back and forth, we can end in 5 minutes probably. And the one thing I think that newsrooms more so than maybe other businesses, well, not all, but definitely in newsroom, is that collaboration that you just don't get, right? So, when people are sitting there and even somebody can hear something, even though they're working on something else, go, wait, I have a source or I have an idea. And a new person coming in, if they're really want to be part of the business, they're gonna listen, they're gonna go, wow, that person did that, maybe I'll try that, so all of that is kind of lost right now. And other than being on Zoom all day long while you're working, I don't really know how else to do that.
How is somebody doing that, like literally just having everybody sit on Zoom?
We can have remote learning, remote workout, right?
It might drive me nuts, but
Take the squares all day
You have to
long.
get dressed and everything.
well, yeah, but then you have to do that in an office too, when
That's
you're in each
quite
other's
true.
spaces, so I guess that was the idea, was to kind of try and
Right,
reproduce that.
Right.
Yeah.
But somehow I think some of this is again, we're building it in the air as we're flying.
Yeah.
So I don't know if a year from now, if we're gonna look back and think, why did we do that? Or, but we should have done it this way, right? So I think it's sort of developmental. But I think the basic points of being able to show empathy, right? To be able to, compassion, empathy to your staff somehow, sending those messages individually into the group, and then the group can actually then do that with each other. I think now those big lessons are looking for those opportunities to actually, do that. I think that's, and I have to say again, a lot of this, it's been helpful because I've been thinking about it more to do this with our folks. That, I'm sure plenty of our stuff be like, what Dave, you didn't do. And it's like, well, through this discussion, I did,
I'm planning to.
yeah, we're having all hands on Tuesday now. That's why we're sort of having the all hands on Tuesday.
Well, I think it goes back to how isolated everybody felt during the pandemic, right? So we're trying to break that now and bring people more together and anchor each other. Otherwise, we're still siloed, in our little desk at home doing our remote work. And Dave, actually for you, I mean, like, you have to have people there. They have to have that interaction.
I mean, that's been the issue,
Yeah,
because so many folks want to work, it's like, we have to be at work.
Right,
We gotta be at work,
right.
because a fifth of the folks we work with are unhoused. It's like, how are we gonna contact? They gotta come in. We have to see them.
Absolutely.
Well,
Right.
and then your residential places there, I mean, everybody's there.
Right, they never closed, right?
Right,
They were
right,
always getting
right.
referred, so.
Thank you so much. Well, please.
I just one last
Our
thing,
last
I just one last thing, I forgot to mention, like, the other self-care, it's like, watch a lot of sports. So I just want to get this in here, I just say, go Giants, I'm not even sure what the score is, but I just, it's a timestamp thing, and
This
it's
is a
like,
really important
right,
moment
it's
for
like,
the Giants.
just very, so we're just, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So we are at the hour, so we're gonna wrap up here, but really want to thank all of our panelists, Sara, Moryt, David. This was such an important and rich discussion. I learned so much and took away so much from it, and I hope our viewers did as well. It was such an important time to talk about this. So thank you three for being here tonight. Thank you for our audience, our live audience who's here in the room, our audience at home watching through Zoom, and of course, KQED for hosting us here in their downtown San Jose facility. Thank you so much. And I also, before we wrap up, I want to share this screen with you guys. These are some mental health resources, phone numbers and emails and websites that you can visit if you want more information on many of the things we talked about today, resources for yourself, for your family, to share with your coworkers and colleagues. I think this is a great list to start with, including Momentum for Health, David's organization, and some suicide prevention hotlines as well. So we want to make sure that's available for everybody. And this recording will be available through the Society of Professional Journalists NorCal chapter YouTube page. My colleague Anita Varma will make sure that's posted. And thank you so much to SBJ NorCal for allowing us to do this discussion. It's been a really important and robust discussion, and I hope everybody learned something from it.
And thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
It's my
Great job.
pleasure. Thank you so much. So that wraps up our discussion tonight. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay well, and thanks again for joining us. Good night.
Thank you.